Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. These days I'm so into ink blending. I recently replaced some of my favorite ink pads with brand new, freshly inked ink pads, and I seem to have fallen in love with stenciling and ink blending all over again. Today's video shares several easy ink blended backgrounds made using just inks and stencils. This video is brought to you by Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community for people like you and me. They offer thousands of inspiring classes on topics including illustration, photography, design, video freelancing, and so much more. I'm in the middle of watching a color theory class from Skillshare called the Color Theory for Illustrators, a fun beginner's guide to creative color. This is a great class, and it already helped me dive deeper into color theory, more than just the color wheel. Now, the content on the Skillshare platform is created specifically for learning. There are no ads, which is fantastic, and they're always launching new premium classes so you can stay focused and follow whatever your creativity takes you. And it's less than $10 a month with an annual subscription. Because Skillshare is sponsoring this video, you get a free trial to Skillshare with the link in my description. So go ahead and click that link and let me know in the comments below what class you're watching. The first 1,000 people to click the link in my description will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium. Thank you, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. I picked several stencils from my stash. All of these happen to be from Simon Says Stamp. And I have different size stencils. I have one that's Slimline Scene Builder. It's from a recent Make Merry release. I also have I like big dots stencil with the big dots. I have the circle mask stencil. There's also one with the layering hearts, raindrops stencil, and I think one more in this pile. My reasoning behind picking the stencils, I tried to select the stencils with the simple basic shapes. So basic geometric shapes are the most versatile, and those are the shapes that will allow you to create a lot of different backgrounds. Because, for example, if you have a stencil of a flower, it is beautiful, but that will only let you make that one flower. Versus if you have a stencil with a circle, for example, you can use that circle to build other shapes, different shapes. And the same with this Slimline Scene Builder stencil. You have different, you might say, oddly looking shapes, but you can use those shapes to create all sorts of unique backgrounds and abstract backgrounds. And I really like to do that. Now, I've already taped my stencil to a panel of white cardstock. I'm using Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I'm also using the new yellow tape from Spellbinders. It's their new must-have, and it's a really handy tool to tape your dies down onto your paper when you're working, say, with stamps and coordinating dies, or just for anything, maybe even taping down glimmer plates. It's a nice, strong tape that doesn't tear your paper. It doesn't leave a sticky residue, and you don't need to use scissors to cut it. You can just tear it with your fingers. So it's a really nice and handy tool to have. I've been using mine for a couple of weeks now, and I love it. Now, as for the ink pads and ink pad colors, I'm using inks from Simon Says Stamp for all of the blending today. But I encourage you to use whatever inks and also whatever stencils you have in your stash. I hope this video will inspire you to pull out your supplies and just play with what you have on hand. Now, I have picked a couple of colors, and I try to go in groups of 2 or 3 for each color. So for the pinks, I have Twirling Tutu, Teeny Bikini, and Hollyhock. So I have a lighter pink, a medium pink, and a slightly more darker pink. And the same goes for yellow. I have Duckling, Lemon Zing, and Sunshine. These are some of my favorite colors, and these are some of the freshly re-inked or freshly opened ink pads. I also have a set of peach colors, and those are Melon, Apricot, and Sunkiss. So really nice, pretty colors. And I'll also use one blue ink pad for one of the backgrounds today, and that's, I believe, is Sea Glass, also from Simon Says Stamp. So I went ahead and used the tape to tape the stencil onto my panel. The idea is to use the image of a ray. I mean, it looks like a ray. It also looks like a wonky rectangle. You can use it in many different ways, and that's the beauty of using an odd shape or a geometric shape. It can be used for different things. Like here, I'm using that oddly shaped rectangle to make a colorful background for my card, but I have another card on my blog where I use this as a ray coming out of the sun, like a sun ray. So different ways to use this, and that's why I like to use the basic shapes stencils the most for my cards. So I'm starting by ink blending different colors of ink onto my background, and I'm flipping the stencil after each ink blended image. So I'm basically going in a zigzag fashion, and I'm trying to blend different colors of ink, the inks that I mentioned previously, in an order so that I have a nice and colorful background. I'm not sticking to a particular order. I'm just sort of trying or going in groups of 3. So I would have 3 pinks and then 3 yellows and then 3 peach colors and then whatever other color I feel like I'm lacking on this background. I am trying to wipe my stencil clean between the different colors. So for instance, once I've blended the pink, before switching to yellow, I will go ahead and I wipe it clean so that I don't contaminate the pink and the yellow and I don't have that unexpected color on my background. As for the ink blending tools, I'm using a variety. I have these ink blending brushes that I really like, but I'm also using my all-time favorites, mini round ink blending tools from Ranger, but I'm not using the native ink blending foams that come with those. I'm rather using the ink blending foams from Spellbinders. They are a little bit different. They're more like makeup sponges. And I find that they hold the ink better, they take the ink better, and they ink blend a lot better. And I prefer to use them with these ink blending tools. Now, these ink blending foams from Spellbinders, they were originally designed to be used with a tool-in-one because there's like an ink blending attachment for the tool-in-one, and you can definitely do that. But I just like to use them with my Ranger ink blending tools. So here's my background all nice and ready. I didn't blend it all the way to the bottom because I knew I'd be trimming it down, and I am trimming it to 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches because I want to foam mount that onto a white card base and have a nice white border around this card. Now, as for the sentiments, I recently discovered these sentiment strips from Simon, and I've been really loving them. I tried to white emboss a sentiment on black cardstock the other day. I was making some other card, and it embossed fine, but then I had one of these pre-printed sentiments sitting on my desk, and it so happened that they were next to each other, like the pre-printed and the heat embossed were sitting next to each other, and I could compare the two, and the pre-printed looked so much better. I was like, wow. So I dug out all of my pre-printed sentiment sets, and Simon does have a lot of those. There are different occasions, different messages, all sorts of things. And I just used one of my Spellbinders banner dies to cut one of the sentiments out to use for my card. So I'm actually not heat embossing anything for this card. I will do some stamping for the other cards, but I just went ahead and used the pre-printed sentiment for this card. Like I said, I really love these cards and I think they're fantastic. And you do get a lot of sentiments on that one card, especially if you're careful and you cut the sentiment so that you're not cutting into the sentiment next to it. Now, I felt like this card needed a little bit something extra. I love to add gold accents to my card. Usually I do that with heat embossing or foiling, but I didn't want to do anything like that for this card. So I decided I'm going to use my gold mirror cardstock. I'm going to cut thin cardstock strips and just use those to enhance my background. So I added some double-sided sticky tape to the back of my gold cardstock, and I used my paper trimmer. I love this trimmer from Tonic to trim really skinny strips to add to my background. I think the strips that I'm trimming are maybe 1/8 of an inch, so really nice and thin strips to add to your background. And you're not using a lot of gold cardstock for this because the strips are so thin. Now, the key is to add double-sided adhesive to the back of the paper before you cut it because, like I said, the strips are so thin, it will actually make it very difficult to adhere these to the card, unless of course you use glue. But then again, I don't want to risk having glue ooze out of the sides of the strips, so that's why I used double-sided tape, and that worked really well. So I just cut a couple of strips from my gold cardstock and I adhered them onto my background following the edge of the ink blending. And I really like how that added a pop of gold to this card. You know, it's very simple. The background is really rather simple, but you have a little bit of that gold and it instantly changes the card. Next, I added double-sided foam tape to the back of my panel and I just foam mounted that onto an A2 white card base. And that looks so cool. Next, I have my sentiment. I picked one that reads sending hugs. And once again, I used foam adhesive to adhere that onto the card. Now here, I'm using a little trick. I have a paper pad, a grid paper pad under my card, and I'm using the grid lines of that paper pad to make sure that I adhere the sentiment perfectly straight and perfectly centered onto my card. Usually, you would use a T-square ruler for this, but in my, I don't know, like 10 years of crafting, I still have not acquired a T-square ruler. Embarrassing, right? So I use what I have on hand, and in that particular case, I had that banner die from Spellbinders, so that's what I'm using as a guide to help me position the sentiment. And even that didn't work because look at that, it looks a little bit crooked. So I went back and I repositioned it and made sure it was perfectly centered on my card. So that finished card number 1. I added some sparkling clear sequins in clear droplets from Pretty Pink Posh and called that card Done. Now for my next background, I'm using the large raindrop stencil from Simon Says Stamp. I didn't actually use this background to make a card, but I still wanted to share this idea with you just to give you more inspiration. Now, you would think the raindrops would usually be blue or teal, you know, somewhere in that color range, but I wanted to use different colors. I was inspired by my previous color combo, so I pulled the same colors as I used for the previous card. Now, I didn't exactly want to make the raindrops. I wanted to create a different kind of background. So I ink blended the first layer of raindrops in light pink. Then I rotated the stencil 180 degrees, so now the raindrops are facing in a different direction, and I'm ink blending them in yellow. I keep doing this. I keep rotating my stencil and adding another layer and another layer of color until I have a full and colorful background. In the end, once I finish ink blending, the raindrops don't really look like raindrops. They look more like flower petals or like different sort of shape. And I really like that. So by using a raindrop stencil and ink blending the raindrops repeatedly and rotating the placement of the raindrops, I was able to create a fun looking, colorful, sort of an abstract background. Like I said, I haven't used this background for a card yet. I do have it on my desk and I'm planning to do so hopefully soon, but I just wanted to show you how I made the background. Now for this next card, I used the Layering Hearts stencil. I used one with the larger hearts and I masked one of the hearts. In fact, you can use, I would say, pretty much any other stencil that you have where you have the heart shape, or you could even die cut a heart shape and use that as a stencil because we're not using the whole stencil here. We're just using that one heart. Now, the idea for this card is to ink blend several hearts in the center of the panel, but overlap them slightly. For this background, I'm not ink blending like I did for my first card, meaning I'm not applying a solid layer of color to the background. Instead, I'm coming in rather heavy-handedly from the bottom, so the bottom of the heart is the darkest, while the top of the heart is a lot more lighter. I really like this method of applying ink. It gives more of a translucent look and it gives a little bit of additional dimension to the shape that you're ink blending. It almost sometimes even looks glassy. I don't know. So I really like this way of applying the color sometimes. I do like to give my ink blending a solid layer of color often, like I did for the first card, but I also love this. So I went ahead and I ink blended a bunch of different hearts in different colors of ink to create a fun and colorful background. It's sort of like a bouquet type of background, but instead of dots, we have hearts. Now to finish the card with the hearts background, I again trimmed that background to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. I also have a gray card base, a light gray card base. It's made using Simon Says Stay Fog cardstock. And I die cut one of the sentiment strips using a banner die. Now I did use a black Copic marker to add black around the edges. I feel like that finishes the sentiment nicely. It gives it the look that it was die cut from black cardstock rather than having that black color printed onto white cardstock. So using that black marker is really helpful. I went ahead and foam mounted the sentiment, and like I did for my first card, I added some sparkling clear sequins from Pretty Pink Posh and some clear droplets. Now for this next background, again, I didn't exactly use this one, but I wanted to show you this idea. I applied the same ink blending method where I'm blending the circles or the shapes heavy-handedly from the bottom, but I'm going very light-handed at the top of the shape. I ink blended the circles in a variety of different colors, but for each consecutive layer, I shifted the stencil up a little bit. Now, I wasn't very precise here. I was eyeballing, so the placement of the circles wasn't exactly perfect. I wish it would have been perfect. But I still wanted to show you this background idea in case you wanted to try and incorporate that into your card making. I think I will re-ink blend this stencil, but first I might add some guidelines with a pencil, like pencil marks, to help me make sure that I position the stencil perfectly and that my circles are not going in a wonky row, but they're like nice and straight. So here you can see me offsetting the stencil for each new ink color, and it does create a nice geometric background. I really like this idea. I like this concept, but like I said, my execution wasn't perfect. So I'll have to come back to this and re-ink blend it again, but with some minor tweaks. Now this last background and the last card that I have for you today is probably my favorite. Here I'm using the circle masks, so they're not technically stencils, they're more like masks, but of course masks are stencils in a way. And my idea for this background was to use the super large circles and create a large circle ink blended background. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. I'm starting with the circle in the top, and here I'm using a combination of the light pink, so twirling tutu, and a hot pink, so hollyhock, and I like how that circle is a little bit lighter towards the center and darker at the top. Next, I'm using a slightly smaller circle shape, and for that one, I'm using the yellow ink, and I am overlapping it with the pink one, creating a little bit of orange in the middle. And once again, repositioning that circle and adding another yellow circle in the opposite corner, also overlapping the pink circle slightly. And now I want to add a little bit of another color, and for this I'm using sea glass, and I'm ink blending a slightly smaller circle onto the card, again overlapping just a hint of pink and a good chunk of yellow to create some green where the blue and yellow overlap, and just a little bit of purple where the blue and pink overlap. And then for that fourth corner, it does look a bit empty. I am coming in with the light pink once again and ink blending that using that same size circle that I used for the first circle for this background. You can see that I'm using really basic shapes, but because the shapes are so basic, I have more freedom towards what kind of backgrounds I want to make. To finish this card, I trimmed the background to 3 3/4 inches by 5, the same as I did for the other cards. I stamped a sentiment that reads, "You are my happy." That's the only card where I added a stamped sentiment instead of using the pre-printed sentiments from Simon. I trimmed that sentiment using a circle die and foam mounted that onto the card, and then added the sparkling clear sequins and the clear droplets. So that's it for me for today. That finishes all of the cards and all of the backgrounds that I have created with the stencils and ink pads. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.